Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio.
And for no specific reason at all or timing at all, we thought it would be fun to talk about the apocalypse. No?
Sure.
Everybody loves end times. No, fun for all. And if you've been following along recently with our episodes, and kudos to you, because we know we have a lot of content. So if you're like, yeah, I heard that one, I'll be like, wow, good on you. Mm-hmm. I have been exploring how to survive the world as it starts to implode. I.e., I bought a bread maker. I have plans for gardens and other things, which made me ponder, what do people think when it comes to women and the apocalypse? Because, again, as we told you previously and many, many times, we're always thinking about episodes in this show specifically. So there you go. And perhaps to no one's surprise, there's a lot of speculation on women, especially in a zombie apocalypse. Because that's the majority of when we were looking for quizzes or something fun, it's just zombie apocalypse. And yes, that includes several articles based on The Last of Us. And yeah, I know. But also a lot of references on how women are the face of the biblical apocalypse as well. So why don't we talk about some of the facets of this apocalypse and women, Anney? Why don't we jump into it?
Let's do it.
You ready?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking this is going to be a little bit shorter one. Why do I do this? I just set myself up, didn't I?
You're starting the apocalypse. This is like what at the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was thinking about the one thing they did or said that started it.
Ours was the predictions, weren't they?
Yes.
Okay, moving on. We're not going to harp on that one again. So the apocalypse is a wonderful, I say this sarcastically, setting for so much entertainment, whether we are talking about movies, books, or games. It has opened up so many scenarios and possibilities and plot lines. And how many types of apocalypse are there? Well, a lot. There's a lot out there. Some of them include pandemic level. And yeah, we still need to finish our game, Anney.
Yes, Pandemic being a board game that is very, very fun, very, very difficult. It has many difficulties and also different iterations. We were playing it during the pandemic. We got through two of them. We got through the main. We got through the main one that people play, and then we did the longer campaign one, and then we had a second longer campaign one, and we haven't finished that one. And when we sit down to play that again, we're gonna have to do a refresher.
We're gonna have to be I'm almost thinking we might have to start over. I don't know how else to do this.
My character is so interesting.
Yeah, he's probably going to die. Anney.
I was the traitor in the other one.
So many.
I didn't mean to be.
Yeah, a few of our characters died.
Yeah.
Y'all.
They're fun.
It's a thing.
Recommend.
It's fun. It is, but it's also a 30-minute setup to remember how to play it.
Mm-hmm.
But we love those campaigns, right?
Yes.
So there's the pandemic, and then we have the man-created war, nuclear holocaust. There's Alien, that type of apocalypse, and so much more. But it seems the more recent, or I guess favorites, are something along the lines of a specific disease or disaster that eventually creates a zombie-like environment that's going to come and eat you or infect you. One of those iterations, right? And to add some depth to these, here's some explainers of some of the apocalypses. Again, I think they have the list goes on and on. I looked at one, and how Google shows you the top, whatever. So there was 12 listed, and then the number says many more.
Yeah.
So we're not doing all of them, okay? So, but just to give a kind of a small explainer. So one timely classic is the nuclear war. Thinking Fallout, that game, you know what I mean, where everybody's hiding in bunkers, all these things. It isn't a surprise that after the usage of the nuclear weapons in World War II, that people had legitimate fears of world collapsing attacks. And of course, the current state of being with power-hungry people who've been given unlimited power, or so they claim. So, that's one that's in the back of our heads. That's an option, right? Then we have the pandemic apocalypse. Again, something that seems like it could occur at any moment. And ashtales.com even talks about being the most plausible of all the apocalypses. Here's a quote. A pandemic apocalypse is one of the most plausible types of apocalypse, and it's a scenario that we are currently living through with the outbreak of coronavirus. While the current pandemic isn't yet on the scale of some of the fictional examples below, it's still a grim reminder of how quickly a virus can spread and how easily civilization can break down. So yeah, that's one. And I have, his article was in the midst of this, so makes a lot of sense. One we didn't mention before is the religious idea of the rapture. Remember the Left Behind series? Did you read any of those, Anney? Or watch Kirk Cameron in action?
That was a heavy sigh. I did read Left Behind. I know there was a show. I didn't watch that. I have said before, I had a teacher in 8th grade who just really, really didn't like that I was an atheist. And he would always say, it's like you're running off a cliff and I'm trying to stop you. And he was like, you've got to read Left Behind. And I did it. It was fine.
I love when people take fictional tales and be like, you need to read this. This is going to be you.
He was really like, this is going to change your whole perspective. And I was like, okay, let me try it.
Well,
and I was like,
it's the same thing as the Da Vinci Code. It came around the same time. So you would think Anyway. Yeah. So here's a brief explanation from that same article, ashtales.com, that says, the religious rapture apocalypse is a popular motif in fiction, often used to explore themes of faith, morality, and human nature. In these stories, the world comes to an end, not through natural disaster or nuclear war, but through the intervention of a higher power. This can take the form of God sending angels to whisk away the faithful, or of Jesus returning to judging the living and the dead. Whatever the specifics, the religious rapture apocalypse is a powerful way to explore the idea of an all-powerful being who decides the fate of humanity. And we're not going to go too deep into that in itself, but we do want to come back around and talk a little bit, just kind of mention some of the female images used to portray these end of times within the religious concepts of the apocalypse based on Revelation. And if you know, you know, which you're going to know at the end of this. But yeah, I find this interesting because, again, when you have tales of the rapture, there's always a center character about the Antichrist.
Yeah.
And if I were to go back and I look at the Left Behind series, it feels like it's portraying someone we know. He becomes president. Just FYI. But what's so funny is part of my family and that like kooky crew, extended family, really, really thought it was Oprah.
The Antichrist?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I'm like a black woman's going to have that much power ever.
Dang. Like,
not because they're not powerful, it's because society wouldn't let them give that kind of authority. But that was their belief for a while. I love the whole... I think Beyonce is actually now part of that category.
I do. I mean, I find it really interesting that a lot of times a woman gets really powerful and all of a sudden heavy quotes around like respectable conservative media is like, they must be witches. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's no other way.
There's no other way. Which, again, I will say at least the Left Behind series, whether or not it's because of lack of imagination or they also felt like, no, there's no way that anybody but a white man in power could be this powerful. Yeah. He does portray the Antichrist as a white man. So, I think we're all on the same page there. Anyway, and then the last example we want to give is addressing the zombie apocalypse, which pretty much like the other types are multifaceted and could all be connected, such as maybe a nuclear war creating zombies and diseases and being caused by some ideal of a holy war. You could put all that together. But zombies, much like vampires or witches, because we've talked about this before, or werewolves, seem to be a part of a cyclical horror fad that becomes trendy at different times. Because like Train to Busan and all of those movies came out, World War Z, Zombieland, they kind of all came out in a chunk together. and they're still popular. So they have outdone the gamut of most other fictional characters. Villains? What would you call them? Villains? Just horror?
Oh, that's the question.
Oh.
We don't need to get into a morality debate about vampires right now. I wouldn't call zombies villains because they typically don't have any brain function. So they're more like a sad outcome of a virus. I don't know. I won't call them villains.
Which zombie movie is it that they adapt? Like they suddenly get faster and they figured out how to do doors and they kind of figured out like senses.
28 Days Later, maybe.
Is that the one?
It was 28 Days Later was new in that they were fast.
Okay.
So
there's another one. I just remember like they have this conversation, the survivors do, about like they're adapting. They're adapting to us, like trying to get to us. And I was like, they are becoming more people-like.
They're like raptors.
Ooh,
oh
my. But with all of that, zombies are somehow created and become a part of the threat of humanity. But we know by this point that it's often a cautionary tale of the downfall of humanity in itself. As Ryan Law, again, who wrote the ashtales.com article, says, although it is usually presented as a horror story, the zombie apocalypse can also be a commentary on society, human nature, and our relationship with technology. And of course, like we looked at, George Romero was like the beginning of the zombie movies and having this whole conversation. Like it was a conversation of race, if I remember, like a lot of things in society, but this specifically about race in its conversation. And then we had filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino who came in trying to make his own kind of version of horror. And when he did it, it was all just like, I have a lot of opinions about him, but all like just grotesque, like type of shocking movie. And I remember there was a quote about just like Romero like getting up and leaving in the middle of the screening because he didn't like it, and Quentin Tarantino took that as a victory, saying he scared him so badly, when in actuality he was just disgusted because the whole point of Tarantino's movie was to gross people out, to shock people. I think there was a scene where he's trying to rape somebody and like his dick falls off, which is kind of funny. Like you're like, okay. But that's obviously no real social commentary to that other than he wanted to be gross and like have that as his conversation. So like we know when it comes to things like the zombie movies, and especially as its origins, it's a bigger conversation about all of this.
The wave before the wave we're in now, those zombie movies were largely about consumerism because it was like, I mean, very basically, I could talk about this for a long time, but, you know, it was essentially, a lot of them took place in malls, and it would be your sort of mindless zombie, and that representing consumerism, but also kind of being, I won't even say romanticized, but like some part of you being like, that would be nice if my like life was, heavy quotes again, more simple in terms of I just have to survive, I guess.
Right. I mean, yeah, and as Laws wrote, also it can be a conversation about our relationship to technology, and I think that's like the newer version of things. So it is. It's like okay, interesting. So in the world of fantasy, these scenarios happen often. But the question that we're having is, how do women fare, especially in these fantasies and horror situations? And we are going to look at the entertainment factor, because there's a lot to be said about what people think may happen and how they see women in these scenarios as well. So I want to go ahead and put this caveat. Most of this conversation, unfortunately, is very cis heteronormative in the ideal that they want, like it's almost rendering it back to gender norms, like classic gender binaries. So they really heavily weighs on that. So that's the bigger conversation, and that's bigger examples that we have. Of course, there's new people who are doing things that are creating and pushing the boundaries, of course. But we can't ignore that that has been a perpetual part of the conversation, especially when you look at like apocalyptic film where they use, and we're going to talk a little more, use women, whether it's as victims or as the plot line, like, you know, dead women or rescuing women and all those things. So that does come into play as well. Now, like many things in life, this question, how do women fare in this situation, is a toss-up. It's a toss-up, y'all. There are those who see women being portrayed as mere tokens, because you got to have some type of romantic tension, right? So for one to survive a long time, must be somewhat capable, but not too capable. And an example that we were given is World War Z. It's been a long time since I've seen that. I did remember, like, I liked it, but it does point out the fact that his wife, who kind of, she's supposed to be a scientist, I believe. Do you remember the movie?
I've never seen
or
it.
the book? Oh, you've never seen it? That's surprising.
No.
I have question marks.
No.
Because it's definitely a horror movie-ish, thriller, I guess. Suspense?
I don't think it was enough on my horror radar.
Okay. It's got a few jump scares.
Okay.
But like the woman is with their family and he's trying to get to them, but he's needed because he's so important, all these things. And like she has this conversation with him, and then like she just stays on the boat. Like that's her entire character.
Yeah.
I can't remember who plays this. So that, or even Walking Dead. Like you, as many like good characters are in there, it's like the token. They're still not the actual main characters. They might be a foil. Think about Glenn and Maggie. Like a lot of people hated Maggie at the end of that because they blamed her for his death. And I didn't even see that scene. I was not ready for that scene.
Oh no, is this spoilers? I don't know when that happened.
I don't, it's later on, but that's been a while, right? Spoiler
I don't know.
Anyway, things happen. Maggie gets blamed. All right. We're going to go with that. And then you have the women being a product or hostages. Think Mad Max or Handmaid's Tale. And yes, there is female leads to this one, and even in the later Mad Max, Furiosa, and Fury Road. But there also lies the abuse of women as a subplot for most of that. Even like the old school one with Mel Gibson and Tina Turner. Come on, her costume is iconic, but it still doesn't say much to women. I will say, again, we've had this debate, and I think, had I already started on the show when Fury Road came out?
Yes, because I got in big trouble at my job the day I saw Fury Road, and it all worked out. But I remember very specifically the day I saw Fury Road.
Were we together?
No, it was before you. I was in Texas, actually.
Okay. So I just remember being really upset. Not upset, but like disappointed because everybody had painted this, all the men who hated this movie, talking about how they didn't need her character. She made it worse. And in the end, it was like, but she's the one that gets saved. Like, yeah, she has a pretty badass role, but in the end, she still needed the main character save her. So why are you mad? This seems typical. What's happening? So even with the big, like, publicity to that, it still didn't wow me. And like, oh, look, there's this feminist icon. And don't get me wrong, she is in the feminist. Charlize Theron on her own is an icon. But in that movie, it didn't match the energy that was given to me, but all those things. And talking about all of this, writer Sable Aradia talks about these types of scenarios in her post titled Sexism in the Apocalypse. And she goes on to talk about how using these types of scenarios are another addition to the harmful idea that the only way women would survive is by being protected by the good men or good guys from the bad men. She writes, "That's why I've had enough of how, yet again, even in what otherwise a well-thought-out apocalypse story from a writer I respect, this is repeated as if it were the gospel truth. Women in the apocalypse need men to protect them from the gains of rapist men."
Yes, and she continues, The roving bands of raping marauders are orcs for writers. You can feel okay about killing them because it's justified, but I think it's perpetuating a dangerous, misogynistic, and misandrist stereotype that has repercussions. The idea that feminism is dependent upon civilization, and that if the authority of civilization were to fall, women would become prey and men would descend immediately into acting like gorillas competing for a harem. Even Margaret Atwood, hailed as a powerful feminist voice, has fallen victim to this stereotype.
So the stereotypes obviously transcend the horror, but also into the comedic ideals as well. Another example of women not doing much or barely seen is from the apocalyptic comedy of This Is the End, where most of the people and women specifically all get swallowed up in a sinkhole. Or the one woman that appears, Emma Watson, playing herself, comes through but hurriedly runs away with an axe when she realizes she may be stuck with an entire group of strange men who make comments that are a little too eager. So obviously she runs away. But like, there's definitely a lot of conversation because that is one of the biggest critiques to these movies and to these shows about apocalyptic scenarios is that, once again, women are just property.
I think I would say one of the things I noticed when I was compiling the survival horror chapter in our book, you can go get wherever you get your books, is that, I mean, and we've been doing it in this episode, is that a lot of times it's the one. Mm-hmm. She's the woman. Mm-hmm. Like it's all men, and then there's the woman. And then if there are more women, then yeah, they are usually some type of property or something to be exploited or protected, but they're not like fully realized characters.
Right. Right. Well, with all of those risks and uncertainties, we do have some, as you said, who have done better, been treated better, existed better, such as the ladies from Zombieland. Some trickery and deception could keep you alive a bit longer, you know, according to them. However, another article written by Ray Alexandra titled How to Be a Woman in the Apocalypse According to Male-Dominated Movies, so this is somewhat sarcastic, does give praise to one woman, again, that one, who plays it smart and safe, and that's Michelle from 10 Cloverfield Lane. I have not seen this movie. Have you seen this one?
I have seen this one.
Okay, this one you have. I like that we've seen one of each at this point now. And she writes this. The protagonist of 10 Cloverfield Lane, Michelle, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, offers a damn near perfect guidebook on how to realistically survive the apocalypse. Thank you, J.J. Abrams, she says. She knows when to be patient and when to fight. Her mind is always working overtime, and she's crafty enough to make her own hazmat suit and gas mask. Thanks to these factors, as well as taking the time to heal from a physical injury, Michelle ultimately outwits the shady doomsday survivalist who ran her off the road and held her in his bunker. On top of all of that, Michelle shows us that even when you do finally find out that the Earth has been invaded by humanity-destroying aliens, it is best not to freak out. Just quietly get into the nearest car and bravely head out to find other survivors. So we do have some. I like this. I like that she wrote that this is our guidebook.
You know, now that you mention it, yeah, that is true, because it's like a guy is trying to protect her, but really he was holding her captive. Yeah. And she had to kind of outsmart him, and then gets out in the world, turns out he was right, but hey, she was like, nah, I'm better off. I'm good.
Without you, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Which brings us to those who think women may be the last to remain. According to our entertainment, The Last of Us is chock full of women leadership. The survival of women is not guaranteed, and talks about how it is stacked against women, but the fact that there are all these that exist, are they all great? No.
I like that,
but they're leaders. They're leaders. So we have Marlene, we have Kathleen, we have Maria, and Ellie herself, of course. And we're not talking about The Last of Us 2 yet, Annie. Not yet. I know you really want to. Willie
All
can.
right.
You know what? I'll give you the exception. Who would you add from The Last of Us to?
Abby.
Obviously. Is she a leader for her group, though?
She's a leader within her organization, I would say.
Okay.
She's like first pick of the team. You want Abby. Also Mel. But that's a different story. Okay, I won't go into it too much. But yeah, I mean, I do like there are a lot of women leaders in the Last of Us series. I kind of like, because I think the whole point of The Last of Us, we jokingly called our crew when we did Betrayal at the House on the Hill, that campaign, that board game, we called our crew the least of us. Because it's like, how did you survive? You probably had to do some things that weren't great.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that's why we called ourselves that.
Well, you chose it. I assumed
that
you
wasn't
did.
me. That was my partner. I am not that creative.
I thought it was you.
No.
But anyway, so I like that, you see the kind of the good and bad of them. And you understand. Like, that's one of the most painful and wonderful parts of The Last of Us.
Right.
Is you're like, okay, I get it. Maybe I don't like it.
I mean, that's the whole point of end of times content, right?
Exactly.
Like, this is the end of humanity. How far do we go? How good or how bad is it?
Mm-hmm.
And with some of those great examples, there's also the argument that many of the women leaders or survivors are often white, perpetuating the idea of white saviors. One thesis written by Sarah Austin wrote about this, specifically titled White Girls in the Apocalypse, Race, Gender, and Sexuality at the End of the World. And as the title implies, it also takes on the more stereotypical heteronormative standards as well. So it's a very cis heteronormative, gender binding type of ideal. So Austin writes, to maintain the cultural status quo while focusing on a girl power heroine, the post-apocalyptic white girl savior subgenre has specific markers that center around white women's sexuality and reproduction as hallmarks for the survival of humanity at large. This combination of traits intended to make characters relatable and aspirational for young adult audience also acts as a form of capitalist activism by exploiting white feminism and girl power rhetoric to generate viewers, ad revenue, and licensed products. These text media maintain the importance of white women's sexuality and roles as mothers in late-stage capitalism while denying the full humanity of queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC, and the other women marked by differences from an idealized heterosexual white identity. So it does say a lot to that. Now, again, we're going to give kudos to The Last of Us, who really kind of changed some of those ideas by bringing in a queer character and all of these things. So we definitely see a little differences in that type of conversation. But for the most part, a chunk of all of these kind of like girl power, end of times, heroism, fighting for society movies, it is white, cis, heterosexual girls. So in her article, Austin gives examples of Katniss from Hunger Games, Buffy from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and even Emma Swan from Once Upon a Time. I was like, look at that. I don't think of that as end of times, but there is a lot of the times where they're trying to end the world.
Oh.
Or take over the world.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
make it theirs. So, like, they destroyed the fairylands, essentially.
Oh. Okay.
And they come to a different world, and then she wants to take over that world.
Got you.
So all those things. So kind of. And with that, she points out their transparent attempt to be inclusive by writing, I argue that the post-apocalyptic white girl savior is always haunted by race and queerness. These side characters make the reader feel as if the trope is inclusive and allows the subgenre to access BIPOC and queer identities to the service of white supremacy and heteronormativity, building on the cultural narrative of white women as universally welcoming and mothering. The girl savior must be near these forms of differences, but cannot embody them, since she is chosen for her lineage or special qualities, which are inextricably tied to her heterosexual white femininity. Buffy, for example, is both more effective and more civilized than the first Black Slayer, Sanaya, which means restless, apparently. Despite the Savior's straight, white, unmarked identity, her friends and helpers, such as Buffy's lesbian best friend Willow, demonstrate her open-mindedness and universal appeal. So her entire paper is a fascinating read. Like, it's a pretty long paper. And she does clearly show the continued white savior trope within these shows or books. And she, like I said, gives True Blood as an example of that as well. You have that heterosexual white girl, innocent white girl coming to, a fairy at that, coming to save, but all her like cronies, her sidekicks, are from the BIPOC community, essentially, as well as usually queer community. So, like, it does hang on to, like, yes, it's about her sidekicks, but they can't be the embodiment of the savior, obviously. In it, she also talks about the different tropes, such as the love triangles and why that's necessary, as well as motherhood, that is heavily used in order to tie the feeling of humanity and emotions into a plot, but still has to stay with that within that heteronormative standards. Like, you cannot stray from that at all. And of course, a part of that conversation with things like vampires or all those is about having children and not being able to be a mother. We know that. We've talked about that. Not siring a child. Think on that. And that's part of, like, you can't do this. Which, motherhood, if that is something that's important to you, can break a relationship for sure. But, like, it definitely has this level of, like, incompletion for those characters. So, you know, you do it like Twilight and get pregnant with a vampire baby, whatever.
Look.
It's coming. It's coming,
I'm waiting
Anney.
for the day.
Oh. And we stumbled upon another article, and this was written by Nicole. It doesn't have her last name, so I'm not leaving it out. Her name is Nicole, and it's for beyondblackwhite.com. And the article is titled and asks, would Black women survive a zombie apocalypse? So she talks specifically about survival skills and how she imagines people may be planning the end of times. And she brings on good points about things that can lessen the chances for anyone's survival. So she talks about children or having a lot of children. And I think about the fact that I have a pet and how there's no way I could remain alive for long if I try to keep Peaches, because if we're being hunted down by zombies or just bad peoples in general, she's gonna bark. She's a barker, and then she hides with me, and I'm like, what? So she's gonna give me away immediately after the barking. And I guess, like, again, when we talk about like young babies or toddlers that don't know why they're in this emergency situation and cry when they need things, like that's their communication, that could be a problem.
This reminds me of I haven't watched it yet, but I have it. Quiet Place Day 1 with the cat.
Oh, with the cat. Well, like the Quiet Place 2, where she has the box. I mean, the first one. I'm sorry,
with the baby.
The first one or the second one? Both.
The second one, she has the baby in a box. Yeah.
And so when it's born, she immediately puts it into that box with the oxygen tank, which is already running out. I'm like, okay, that's genius. How do you know for sure without testing that's okay? Willing suspension of disbelief. This is what makes these movies amazing. So, you know, those things I do think about as well. But Nicole never really gives any definitive answer outside of the fact that beyond Black women know how to survive, point blank, and they know how to push forward. As Nicole writes, I'm a survivor. I'm not going to give up. Destiny Child right there. If nothing else, Black women are survivors. For better or worse, we pride ourselves collectively on the ability to make a dollar out of 15 cents. The tenacity would be one of the key ways Black women could survive. In the face of adversity, we plant our feet and get that work done. Additionally, I could count on Black women to make the canned food rations and squirrel meat post-apocalypse to be rather tasty, given the apocalyptic circumstances. It is a talent to be able to cook just with what you have and make it good. There's only a handful of people that I know that can do that. Chefs, obviously, but like that I've known in real life. And yeah, I'm not one of those people. And however, Nicole does say, like many others, can't imagine that humanity in itself would be so kind or giving. And with all of those uncertainties, could survive in this scenario? Who is going to survive in those scenarios? So she gives advice. So if you want to go back and look at that article that I just mentioned, you should go back. She's just like, if you're into witchcraft, get those herbs, ladies. And I'm like, yeah, that's actually really smart. Get those herbs. With all of that, because we're kind of going to come back into, I guess, the real scenario. Like, could we survive if this was a real scenario? So do you have any characters, Anney, that you would regard as good examples of surviving or just iconic women of the apocalypse?
Yeah. I mean, I hesitate because, like, good examples, again, I think a lot of times apocalypse media is about, like, how you hold on to your humanity when you're in this situation. So there are examples of people doing that. But it's still, like, you've faced so many losses. I would say Dina, who is from The Last of Us 2. I won't give any further spoilers, but just, yeah, Dina. Claire Redfield from Resident Evil 2. She's a good one. Maybe Heather from Silent Hill 3, which, by the way, I recently found out. I don't know how I didn't know this, but there's a Silent Hill 2 movie that's based on Silent Hill 3, which is one of many funny things about that movie. And I watched it, and I had the time of my life, to be honest. It was, Carrie-Anne Moss is in it. Carrie-Anne Moss is probably like, please never bring this up again. But speaking of Carrie-Anne Moss, Trinity from The Matrix.
Yeah.
She's a good one. I do think Maria from The Last of Us and Marlene. Oof. It's just so tragic. All of it's so tragic. I'm like struggling to think of one.
That's a spoiler alert. Yeah, those are some good ones. I haven't seen all of Fallout. Obviously, the Fallout's just beginning, but the main character, she seems to be, again, she's also very wholesome. So, and she's also very white. So I wonder if this is the same context as we were talking about. I'm trying to think because, yeah, like in all the horror movies, The Train to Busan, it was a pregnant woman with a little girl that survived, but it was based on her father and the father of or the husband of the pregnant woman. Like, that really helped. So,
yeah. I mean, this is really interesting too in terms of the fiction piece we do once a month that I wrote when I was right out of college.
You have apocalyptic characters. Yeah, we're pretty sure Last of Us people stole it from you, which they've never read this, so somehow.
They absolutely didn't, but I like to blame them as if they did. But it is interesting in terms of that. It's instead of like being a Joel and Ellie, it's a woman and her son.
Yeah, which is interesting. The flip.
Yeah, but it does have a lot of these things in it. It's hard to escape.
It is. So with that, let's ask the real question. How will women do in an apocalypse? For real. In real life, Anney. So in a zombie type of scenario, do you think we could survive?
No, I don't think I could. I've thought about this. We've talked about it on the show. I'm in Atlanta. I would be in huge trouble. I mean, if the CDC, something happens there, I'm already
infected.
But like to get out of the city, and then you're dealing with like dwindling supplies because in a city you have more, but there's more danger of. I've thought about it a lot. I don't think I would make it. I'm not gonna. I think I'd make it maybe a little bit longer than some people, but not very long.
Not very long.
How about you?
I don't think I would make it either, but I think I would make it just doing the whole like don't come out hiding. But you know what? Y'all stick around because we're gonna do a very informative and obviously very realistic quiz.
Definitely.
To see if we could survive at the end of this. But according to Megan A. Armstrong, she says maybe. But it definitely isn't a great set for women. In her article for International Feminist Journal of Politics, titled "Why is the Zombie Apocalypse So Terrible for Women? Gender, Militarism, and Ontological Insecurity at the End of the World," she explores the topic with the help from the book and film World War Z, which I have now referenced twice because it's in several of the articles. She takes a deep look at the basis of the heavy militarization of the situation, how they take on the very masculine, violent role or route as the solution to the problem.
She writes, "This is a common theme in apocalypse narratives, the chaos of the immediate aftermath of the disasters leading to a Hobbesian state of nature. What we imagine to be a robust, stable civilization can be taken down and fast by a single destabilizing element. Apocalyptic visions of the future can help to articulate present anxieties and offer hypothetical responses. They create a space for an imaginary future in which characters map out a means of survival. Such visions allow audiences to imagine themselves in the narrative and therefore produce certain kinds of normative, legitimate responses. However, in WWZ, World War Z, the aggressive militarized response to the zombie threat, led by a particularly masculinized hero figure, departs in some ways from other examples of the genre."
Right. So we're jumping into the fact that, again, it's kind of like the one versus the total, which I don't think it's too different, but during the beginning of World War Z, it kind of was different, especially if it was like an international. So I don't think it happens in the US, it happens somewhere else first, which a lot of things do take place, but sometimes it just happens in the US first. And the article talks about the gendered roles specifically. Once the zombies strike, however, this, and they're talking about all the stuff that had happened previously, is undone, and Karen remains with the children, the wife, as we were talking about, as Jerry travels the world in search of the key to eliminating the zombie threat. This suggests that WWZ, like so much of the zombie genre, functions to stabilize gender roles in a time when traditional gender roles have been increasingly destabilized. This return is, interestingly, informed by the more progressive gendered order depicted at the outset of the film. Jerry is neither aggressive nor violent, but first and foremost a family man who will give up his career to protect his family and fight for their survival when necessary. Through Jerry, ontological security is restored through particular gendered and militarized responses as he assumes his role as protector of the family and directs the international military action that secures civilization itself. The zombie allows for the restoration of gendered order in a time of threatening destabilization, but an order that still nods to its more contemporary evolutions. And she continues explaining why this is all important, saying, "There are some for whom the normal way of life, the status quo upheld in the extermination of the zombie, was never conducive to survival, but their stories are not often told in zombie narratives. WWZ does reveal that certain kinds of families may survive the zombie threat while others will not. To occupy normative gender role is not enough to guarantee survival, and here we see how the knowledge system of zombie reveals itself to be not only gendered, but racialized." So she goes into a deep dive on that. It's a very fascinating paper. She really goes deep into this conversation, almost like this is a societal tell on warning us that feminism is ruining our lives and it's going to kill us because of zombies.
I can't help it. I got a couple more points about The Last of Us. I gotta
Go
make.
ahead.
One is that, and this is so tricky, and I actually do have an episode that's coming out about this that I wrote forever ago, but because it's a pain, I've just been putting it off. But I feel like the message that was intended at the end of The Last of Us, a lot of people took it very differently. And so, yes, they were like angry. Oh, she's a girl. She can't survive. Like, she's a young, this is wrong. When I don't think that's what the actual material was saying, but people were taking that and using it as like, oh, this is why this can't be right. I hate this. And I've even heard that in terms of the violence that Ellie does, the main character, one of the main characters. Like, I feel like this is irredeemable. I'm like, you seem to be cool when Joel did it. I find this really interesting.
Yeah.
But like those divides, we're gonna see how that plays out. But also, I've been in the first time I went to DragonCon, which is a huge convention here in Atlanta that's kind of like Comic-Con, very nerdy and all this stuff. I made a mistake and I went to how to survive a zombie apocalypse panel. And all of them were like conservative dudes that were saying, you know, liberals are all going to die. And then we'll go back to the right way. The natural way.
As God intended, obviously.
Right. Anyway, Armstrong concludes, when we read artifacts such as WWZ with attention to what they reproduce and normalize through the zombie as knowledge system, we can understand negotiations of ontological insecurity as they are enmeshed with gender and race and remain attuned to what responses they render intelligible and possible. Here we can see the ways in which anxieties over how Western civilization survives the overwhelming threat of the zombie are materialized and resolved. The zombie reveals what and who is considered necessary for civilization to survive, as well as who will be abandoned. The sense of contemporary feminism as a threat to the male self comes through in the negotiation of a kind of masculinity that is responsive to changes in gender norms and expectations, but still positions masculinity as a savior. Yes, also in every survival horror game, pregnancy. Yeah. Oh my God. That's disturbingly not that far off. It's dangerous.
And then also that conversation of like, who has access to things and trying to get those things just in cases.
Mm-hmm.
There was, of course, one response, and I think it was a really interesting idea, is that writer Sammy Eastwood watching some of these horrors, and we've talked about this in video gaming, like these impromptu crop tops that make no sense in trying to defend your land, property, or self. She says that women won't survive the apocalypse thanks to our clothes. Like, that's the beginning of her article. And she talks about those conversations of like, why are we dressed like this? Like, we couldn't wear ballet slippers. Like, no wonder we're falling over ourselves and dying when the killer is chasing us, because those heels do not work when you're running in dirt.
You lose them. You use them as a stabbing device, but yeah.
But also, I can't walk in them, so like breaking my ankle.
Right. Well, and by that point, it's too close. You don't want to be that close to them. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I did see a parody video just recently about how the woman gets a complex because the serial killer keeps passing her by and ignores her to kill everybody else. And she's like, why not? Why not me? Anyway, but yeah, that could be a problem. That could get us killed, so some say. But again, all this may be upon. Many have said that the way of survival is actually the gendered idea of femininity. It might be a savior to this. History even shows that more women survived some of the most difficult times. From a 2018 Complex article, journalist Victoria L. Johnson writes, scientists over at the University of Southern Denmark analyzed times of feast or famine in the past 300 years, including the Swedish famine of 1772 to 1773, life expectancy of enslaved people in Trinidad in 1813, the 1845 Irish potato famine, the measles epidemic in Iceland in 1842 and 1882, as well as the 1933 Ukraine famine. And there was always one truth that remained true on average. Women lived longer than men, and this is regardless of age as well. So she is actually referring to a study titled Women Live Longer Than Men, Even During Severe Famine and Epidemics. In that research paper, they write, women are the life expectancy champions. They can expect to live longer than men almost anywhere in the world today. This pervasive inequality has intrigued researchers for decades. The cumulative corpus of research supports the conclusion that the gap has biological underpinnings modulated by social and environmental conditions. And what's more, it's during the hard times that women still outlive men. So they continue, the conditions experienced by the people in the analyzed populations were horrific. Even though the crisis reduced the female survival advantage in life expectancy, women still survived better than men. In all populations, men had equal or higher mortality than women across almost all ages. A substantial part of the overall female advantage in life expectancy was due to survival differences among infants. Further support of the hypothesis of an overall ability of women to withstand high mortality crisis better than men comes from a different mortality measure. From all populations, the extreme age, the age to which 5% of the population survived, was higher for females than for males.
And writer Sarah Youngblood Gregory writes specifically about the need for a feminine approach to survival in their article for Cosmopolitan. And here's a quote. Gender roles are obviously socially constructed, and yet their conventions shape our lives and justify exclusion and oppression, even in our fantasy worlds. Femininity, which I'm defining in a traditional sense as relating to women, softness, motherhood, physical weakness, emotional communication, collaboration, and submissiveness, is often an affront to the gritty, survivalist mentality of the apocalypse genre, which in a COVID era, climate change-ravaged Earth has captured the imagination of so many.
Yeah, and they go on to talk about how this, though, can actually help survival rates and how being able to listen and communicate and like staying in a group, that humanity, which is often seen as feminine, can actually bring on a survival tactic and bring on more for being able to survive. They also go on to talk about writers from the marginalized community and how they understand how their leading heroine doesn't reject womanhood, but embrace it. So, and they talk about how it comes from a depiction of real life. So here's another quote from Gregory. Butler, the author, and Brown's depiction of womanhood lean on the true history of women surviving world-ending events. Writer Fanny Cho argues in her latest work that the apocalypse is nothing new. It happened over and over again to marginalized people. And then conclude, true femininity is a tool for better, more just worlds. Through community care, communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and empathy, femininity has already survived the worst and will continue to do so. Maybe not on TV, but always where it counts. And yeah, I think that was an interesting conversation because, yeah, like we often see femininity portrayed as a weakness. So they get hysterical and cry and can't move on and they don't want to survive anymore. And that's not necessarily how that goes. Like you the horrible opposite portrayal of like an angry mother that needs to get revenge versus like the mother who just gives up instead of the in-between who sucks it up and is like, all right, been through this. I know how we can get through this. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And there have been we've done past episodes on this, about a lot of studies about pain endurance in women versus men, and just like long-term endurance. And women usually come out on top in those studies. So
good. And yeah, I just want to kind of head on to what I think is interesting, specifically when it comes to the religious apocalyptic literature. This was my like secondary in education. I think I might have said before, apocalyptic literature. But I find it fascinating because this one actually comes from the westendbiblicalchapel.org, and they talk about Revelation and they talk about the 4 women present of the apocalypse. And I believe there's several like depictions in books often used. And these are all going to sound familiar, but one of them is the Jezebel, which is a she-devil. And they describe it in their resources that she is the leader of a church for idolatry and immorality, and that she was guided by the familiar spirits of the wicked queen of Jezebel of the Old Testament. If you know Jezebel, she gets a pretty bad rap. You know. Then we have woman clothed with the sun. And apparently I think she is the better version. So there's always like a yin and a yang. I'm using Asian ideology. But this woman represents a corporate body. She's the nation of Israel. So remember that. She has given birth to the man-child who is the Messiah. So that's one. That's the other one. And then the harlot. The harlot, she's present in a lot of like apocalyptic type. Supernatural, she comes up a lot in that. So this is the third woman that's designated, and she's the mother of all prostitutes and the abomination of the earth. This is all in all caps, when they describe these people, by the way.
Oh my goodness.
So you be
Okay.
forewarned.
Extra wary.
And then we had Bride of the Lamb, who is, once the whore of the Antichrist is destroyed, she is the bride of Christ who is displayed.
Okay.
So in a lot of representations, I think we've talked about this, like there's the Trinity, and it's often the church is the bride. To that. So there's so many conversations, but I thought that was interesting because that does come into play in our regular types of things like supernatural, like we talked about, because there's how many apocalyptic situations do they have in their 15 seasons?
Every season?
Every season?
Yes. This is the TV show, by the way, everyone.
Oh, yes. Which keeps popping back up. I just saw someone's reaction to watching all 15 seasons, like she was having a time. But I thought it was interesting because that does play a lot in what we are hearing today. I know the Bride of Israel, all of that. That's a big conversation we're having, especially when we do come back and talk a little bit about Project 2025 and trying to come back to these roles, those gender roles that they think is holy in order to fix things, but also telling us that all of these things, such as like natural disasters and such, being a thing of the apocalypse and who we should be watching out for. So something to take note of. I did say that we were going to talk about whether or not we were going to survive. I sent you 2 quizzes, Anney. Did you take them?
I did.
Okay. The first one, how long would you survive? The ultimate zombie quiz.
I got 5 months. I made it 5 months, but no more. No more.
I think I live 4 months longer than you.
Good for you.
I'm going to eat your body. I'm just kidding. I'm not. I wouldn't do that to you.
You wouldn't like the taste. Too much cheap light beer.
Oh no, beer chili is great. And there was a beer can chicken or something.
Oh gosh.
And then this is the BuzzFeed quiz. How would you make it in The Last of Us? How long would you make it in The Last of Us apocalypse? How long did you make it?
It said 90 years.
Oh.
And that I would die of natural causes.
90 years? That's not even possible, is it? I guess it is.
But I took it twice. And I, like, the first time I did, like I said, the last time we took a quiz like this, and I was like, you know, I'm in between these two. And the first time I took it, I got 1 day. So I'm on the ledge of living for a long time or dying very quickly.
It's one or the other. Either you're immediately going to die or you'll survive forever if you can survive that 1 day. Okay.
I think so.
Mine says 30 years. So I feel like that's a good time. After 30 years of barely surviving, you trip on some fungi and a herd of fungi people come to you. Yeah. I'm devoured by fungi people.
That would be sad, but yeah.
That would be sad. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
Well, I don't get a natural death, I guess. That's fine. That's fine. It turns out that we do kind of survive-ish. I do like the people who are like, who? Because they did write that. Like, immediately. I want immediately out. Like, Caroline and I have a whole pact.
Yeah.
If in case a zombie apocalypse happens. So, there you go, guys. That is a very shortened, could we survive? Let's look at what society and entertainment tells us, could we survive? It's a toss-up.
I mean, you know, like, took us an hour long to get to about, it's a toss-up because it is. That's kind of what the apocalypse is about, I guess. Although, you know, religious, like the rapture, in theory, if you've done everything right, you'll be all right. That we'll have to come back and talk more about some of that stuff, but for now, that is what we have to say about women and the apocalypse. Please let us know if you have any thoughts on this. If you have a favorite apocalyptic entertainment piece of media, or just any suggestions about what more we should talk about this, you can email us at Stephanie and Mom Stuff at iHeartMedia.com or hello@stuffwe'llnevertoldyou.com. You can find us on Blue Sky at Mom Stuff Podcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff We'll Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. And we do talk about some of this stuff in there. Thanks as always to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.